I didn't understand what words like chakka and tranny and like all of these words meant back then. I would be beaten up by people significantly bigger than me. And when people would say very disgusting things, trolls would sort of flood my DMs and call me all kinds of things and drop rape threats and death threats.
Hello and welcome. You're watching The Logical Indian. I'm Shweta Kothari. Joining us today is Dr. Trinetra Haldar. She's Karnataka's first trans woman doctor and also been at the forefront of trans rights movement in India. She's going to talk about her personal journey today and the journey of transgender rights in India. We are, of course, privileged to have her. Doctor, thanks very much for your time. I want to first begin by asking you to share with us your story, the story of your upbringing, your transition, and from being a child who was bullied to a doctor today.
So, speaking of my life in general, I would like to sort of start at the very beginning when I was 3 or 4 years old, right? That's when I did not understand labels. I did not know that society had this thing called gender. I only knew what I liked to do and what I didn't like to do. And what I liked to do was put on my mom's jewelry, put on my mom's makeup, do a lot of things stereotypically associated with girls. It's not necessary that every girl likes to do those things, but that's just who I was, right? And it's only when people started to tell me that, okay, listen, this is not right, you should not be doing this, that it doesn't look good for a boy. That's when I realized that, okay, so boys are supposed to do certain things and girls are supposed to do certain things. And that's how early we start to teach children the concept of gender roles and gender and what is right and what is not okay. So, for anyone that doesn't fit those defined notions of what a boy is and what a girl is, that discomfort starts to set in very early at that young, an age. So, around 3 or 4 is when I started to realize that, okay, something is wrong with me, that the way I see myself is very different from the way that everybody wants to see me. And I tried very hard to fit this sort of image of what they wanted me to be. But for a 3 or 4 year old child, that's ridiculous. I mean, what does a child know about these things? A child can only do what comes naturally to them, right? And that's all I could do. And I started going to school, and that's when I was introduced to this whole new dictionary of slurs that people would start throwing at me that I didn't even understand the meaning of. I didn't understand what words like chakka and tranny and like all of these words meant back then. What does a 5 or 6 year old child know? And I sort of grew up in Hyderabad for the first 8 years of my life. And, a very commonly used word there is point 0.5. And I didn't know what point 0.5 means until I learned fractions and realized that, okay, point 0.5, they're actually referring to me as half, like half and half, half man, half woman. So, it was very, very common. And I would be bullied on a daily basis in my apartment complex, at school. I would be called names. I would be beaten up by people significantly bigger than me. And it was just a very difficult time because I just didn't know what to do differently. I thought I was doing something wrong. Everyone was saying I was doing something wrong, and I didn't know what it was. I was just being myself. So when a child is sort of told that what they're doing is wrong and they can't change it, of course they're going to start hating themselves, right? You can't direct that anger at anybody else but yourself because everyone is telling you you're wrong, something is wrong with you. And I think that is when, I started to become deeply, deeply insecure about everything about myself. That's when I started really kind of hating myself, and it did take a toll on a lot of things throughout the years. It took a toll on my extracurriculars, it took a toll on my friendships, on my relationship with my parents, to some extent my academics as well. And my academics, of course, was one thing that I tried to keep intact for as long as I could, because it was the one thing that gives you street cred in the country. If you're good at studies, at least you have the teachers supporting you. At least your parents don't have the excuse that, okay, you're not focusing, you know. So I, just kept getting bullied. And then there was sexual harassment. Teachers many a time would be the bully in the situation. And only when I became a teenager did I realize, okay, that words like gay and lesbian and transgender, etc., these things exist. And I started to understand myself more and studied very hard, got into medical school somehow. And that's when I sort of let myself go and I said, okay, this is my time to figure myself out. And I had already come out to my parents at age 13, 14, and they had taken it very, roughly in the beginning. But by the time I was in college, they had learned a lot of things. I had learned a lot of things. And I started going to therapy. And of course, medical school was rough, but finally here we are, at the end of medical school, wherein I can call myself a doctor. And a lot has gone into it, a lot of struggle has gone into it, but I have also been very lucky.
Absolutely. And you have made sure that a lot of your viewers, people who look up to you, get
Yeah.
to be a part of that journey. You have made sure you catalog that journey
Yes.
on various social media platforms. I want to understand from you,
Yes.
what was the reaction of the people in general when you started talking about it, when you started documenting it?
Okay. Right. So for me, I think the decision to document everything, to sort of start from scratch, it wasn't a conscious decision to sort of necessarily educate people. For me, the online space was my only release. At that point in time, when I couldn't be myself in person, when I couldn't dress a certain way or look a certain way, or talk about my opinions in public, when I wasn't completely accepted by family and peers and stuff, the online space was all I had. So initially, when I started putting myself out there, and when people would say very disgusting things, trolls would sort of flood my DMs and call me all kinds of things and drop rape threats and death threats. It was very alarming. It was very scary. It continues to happen to this day, but of course, I've grown up a little bit and I have figured out what is a threat and what is not and how to deal with it accordingly. But initially, it was very, very scary. But as I started to share more, as I started to progress in my own transition in life more, a lot of support started pouring out, like more than I could ever imagine. I never saw this coming, any of this. It was completely random, right? I think after my surgery, when I vlogged through the whole thing, that's when things really blew up. And I sort of started talking to a lot of trans people and queer people across the country. And it was such a privilege, to hear them say that, thank you for putting this out there because it gives me a little bit of hope. And that's all I wanted after that point. I realized that if my therapeutic space can be therapeutic for other people and it can help other people and change certain perspectives, even if it's like a very small number, then it's a big deal because I didn't have that growing up. And to be that for anyone else, even one person, means the world to me. So over the years, the amount of support has only increased, and um, it's given me so much in my life. It's given me so many people, so many conversations, so much insight, and a lot of opportunities. So I think I am also very, very lucky that things blew up the way that they did. But I think more than anything else, I'm just happy that so many people out there will have some frame of reference, and I will keep trying to be better at being that representation that people need.
So it's not just the absence of the infrastructure, but it's also the phobia, the transphobia that exists in
Yeah.
the medical community that you have in fact talked about widely. And since you are a part of it now, perhaps you've also closely experienced it yourself.
Absolutely. I think one thing to understand is that the medical community and the decisions that were made in the medical community with respect to the healthcare of trans people, it never came from trans people, ourselves. It always came from cis people dictating the rules as to what should be done and what should not be done. You get to do this, you get to do that. It's always been a very paternalistic sort of relationship between doctor and patient. That it's always, I know what's best for you, I know your life better than you do, and I will therefore decide what you get to do and what you don't. And that stems from, it's not new. When trans people first started approaching doctors in the 1900s for care, for help, it was always cisgender doctors that decided what was okay, what was not. There was a time that doctors treated trans people with electroconvulsive therapy, with all kinds of interventions to fix us, right? And that continues to this day. It was only much later that we found out that these things don't work, and it was only by pure trial and error, or torture rather, that we realized that okay, trans people are not lying about who they are. We need care and we need gender affirming affirming intervention to, be comfortable with ourselves. But that kind of mistreatment has continued to this day. And we find all kinds of outdated information in our medical textbooks. When I was in my second year, I studied in forensic medicine, things like, homosexuality being talked about like it was a sexual perversion, like it was something done by mentally deranged people. And transsexualism and transgender people are also people suffering from disorders. So all this sort of Freudian nonsense features into our textbooks even in 2020, despite the fact that we've come a long way, both with respect to what we know as the medical fraternity globally, and with respect to legal changes that have happened in the country, right from the Nalsa judgment in 2014, the decriminalization of homosexual sex after the judgment that came out later. So I think that even in 2020, for us to be this far behind is shameful, really, that we need to be doing better. And I have faced it myself. I have faced teachers throwing me out of class because I got my nose pierced. I have seen professors ask me uncomfortable questions during Viva sessions. And a lot of professors who were very friendly with me before this process have sort of become a little hostile or don't talk to me the same way. And they're very clearly uncomfortable. Um, of course, I do have a lot of people on my side. Of course, I have a lot of doctors supporting me. But there has been a fair amount of phobia, and perhaps it might have been worse elsewhere. But I will definitely say that it was there here, in college when I was going through all of this.
Right. I want to talk about a couple of policy interventions. You talked about the NALSA judgment. The Transgender Persons Act of
Yes.
2019 states that a transgender person cannot be identified a male or female before the gender affirming surgery. Now, a lot of activists have said that
Right.
this is wrong. If perhaps you could throw some more
Yes.
light on why this is fundamentally flawed.
Right. So the Transgender Persons Act, it has a history. So the Transgender Persons Act in 2019 is still a little bit better than its original version in 2016. Right. So after the Nalsa judgment of 2014 came out, we were very happy. It's not a perfect judgment by any means, but it did give us the right to legally identify as male, female, or transgender without any medical intervention, without any surgery, without any of that. Because the Nalsa judgment, it understands that who you are, your gender identity, is a very fundamental, visceral, internal part of who you are. And it's not something that shows on the outside by one fixed sort of set of organs or one fixed set of characteristics. So the judgment, it sort of put that into the document, and it said that you have every right to put down whatever you want on legal documents. And for that to be made into a law, so that happened in 2014 when we had a private members bill, which sort of put down a lot of the Nalsa judgment into a bill, and we were very happy with that. But the later version of that, the Transgender Persons Bill 2016, that was a watered down version of the private members bill of 2014, Tiruchi Siva's bill of 2014, and also the Nalsa judgments. That was very upsetting because the 2016 bill, it had a very poor definition of transgender. It had a very poor definition of interventions and how to move forward. So all of that was protested and it was made a little bit better. And finally, we got the Transgender Persons Act in 2019. So one might assume that, okay, the problems have been solved, but that's still not the case because the 2019 Act in itself also says that only after you have sex reassignment surgery will you be allowed to identify as male or female, right? And that's extremely problematic because I have always been a girl. I have always been who I am on the inside, and I did what I had to do, surgery, hormones, whatever, because that was my personal decision, right? And that's no one's business but mine. What surgeries I have, what is between my legs, is nobody's business but mine. I have been who I have been on the inside. And for you to assume that I'm lying about it for I don't know what reason is absurd. Because look at the kind of discrimination that we face by simply stating that we are transgender people, by simply stating that we are who we say we are. So it's important to understand that it's not for a cis person to decide who I am and who I am not. Because for you as a cis person, does anybody ask you to strip and take off your clothes and then decide if you're male or female? No. Then no one has the right to do that to me, because it's an extremely humiliating and a very, very degrading attitude to have, that you don't believe us when we say who we are, while we sort of experience severe trauma, severe discrimination for those exact things. And also, we have to consider that sex reassignment surgery is not magic. It doesn't happen everywhere. Very, very few surgeons actually practice it, and it's a very expensive procedure. As a doctor myself, I can tell you that we are not trained to do it. Even MCH plastic surgeons are not trained to do this very well. So to expect every transgender person to go through a surgery that you deem to be valid, it's absolutely unfair. It's ridiculous and it's discriminatory, and it disadvantages a huge populace in the country. And we are a huge country with one of the largest transgender populations in the world. And to so easily say that you undergo this procedure, you do this, you do that, and only then will you have equal rights, is absolutely discriminatory. And it violates the Nalsa judgment. And that's, of course, only one part of the act that is problematic. Right? There's so many aspects that are problematic, including reduced sentencing for crimes committed against us. That if I were to be raped, if a transgender person were to be raped, the sentencing is far lesser than a cisgender woman or someone born biologically female, so to speak. So that's, again, supremely discriminatory, and it violates my constitutional rights. And one can go on and on, but these are, I think, two of the most important flaws in the Trans Persons Act. One is self-determination of gender, and two, constitutional rights, you know?
Right. I want to shift focus to the education and the changes in education policy. For a very long time, we've talked about, bringing in LGBTQ education into our system, making sure that students are aware of it, be it at college level or at school level, but that really hasn't happened so far. What sort of changes do you think we should at least begin with? And it's about time that we introduce some element of, awareness about the community into our education system.
Right. So I think, it's a very ideal sort of situation to say that LGBTQ plus rights need to be introduced very early on. I completely agree, 100% agree that the earlier you start, the better. That, a child is most receptive to these things. You start at home, make this a dinner table conversation, make this a conversation that we have at ages 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, at that level. But, we exist in a country wherein sex education is so bad, we barely even have it. I remember I was in the 10th or the 12th grades, and that's when we were learning about the human reproductive system. And one person had to stand up in class and read the whole chapter, as the teacher was very embarrassed about the whole thing. That's what sex education was for me. So I think for so many of us, sex education comes from the internet, from our friends, and from pornography, which is a very sad state of affairs, right? So you can only imagine how bad it is when it comes to LGBTQ plus awareness. I think that in a very ideal world, I think that as we sort of build on the new education policy, it's very important that we include sex education from a very early age. And by very early, I mean as young as 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, at a level that kids can understand. And I have had the easiest time explaining this to kids that age. Frankly, I have had the worst time with adults, but with kids, it's so easy because they are not conditioned. They are not sort of caged by all of these notions around gender and sexuality. They are infinite and they're free to understand these things. And the earlier you expose somebody to the idea that I am a human being and I have rights and I have every right to have the same things as everybody else, the earlier that child is going to understand, And I would say that would be the best way to handle this in the long run. Adults are very difficult to change, but kids, they're the future of our country, and they are absolutely how we can sort of have a safer space, a safer country, and a safer society, a more inclusive society that doesn't just accept us, but celebrates us, because that's what we need.
All right. I think I'm going to let you go with one last question. How important was it for you personally to become a doctor? You've mentioned at numerous places that this day onward, you're going to call me a doctor and I'm done with all the name calling. A lot of people out there, Trinetra, who are not perhaps as privileged as you are, you rightly mentioned, still struggling, haven't come out of the closet. How important, therefore, it is for the entire community to really rise up to the opportunity and, beyond the current existing ways and means in which they earn bread and butter, but to exceed in their various professions
Yeah.
that are available to them?
So for me, it's been a statement to be a trans person in medicine because it's so important that doctors are exposed to this because we don't learn it in we don't learn the most basic literacy of gender and sexuality during our school, and then we don't learn it during our MBBS. We don't learn it in our postgrad, super specialization, whatever. So at the end of the day, trans people are left with nowhere to go. And that's why for me it was very, very important to do this, especially in a country where doctors are revered, doctors do have a certain status. It was very important for me. But at the same time, if I did not come from caste privilege and class privilege and the privilege of my parents supporting me, I wouldn't be here. So for me to say that it's just hard work and nothing else, it's not true. It's a lot of privilege along with hard work that got me here. So I would say that, of course, you will call me doctor and give me the respect that that deserves. But every single trans person, whether a trans person is a sex worker, whether a trans person is a doctor or does anything else for a living, we deserve those same rights. I don't deserve it more because I'm a doctor. I don't deserve it more because I have a certain outreach and following. All of us deserve that basic respect, and all of us deserve the same constitutional rights. And I do not want to engage in those respectability politics. If I did not have these privileges, I may have been a sex worker as well. And I should deserve the same respect that I deserve today, even as a doctor, because I am a human being and so is a sex worker, and we are part of the same community. And all of us deserve the same things.
Dr. Trinetra Haldar, pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for sparing time for speaking to the Logical
Likewise.
Indian.